On the PlayStation blog, they describe Resident Evil 4's DLC. Separate Ways tells the story of Ada Wong and her parallel journey throughout the events of Resident Evil 4, filling in the unanswered questions from the main story. The full story will be revealed to you as you view both sides of the events from both Ada and Leon's viewpoints. They also set up her backstory. Before Leon S. Kennedy had even set foot in that cursed village, she was there. Her mission? To retrieve the cult's darkest secret, the Amber. Now Ada must deal with an unknown threat that is devouring her from within. An accomplice with a dark past and ulterior motives, and a chance reunion with the man she least expected, Leon S. Kennedy. Why did she accept this mission, and what part will she make for herself in the shadow of Leon's investigation into the abduction of the president's daughter? In this video, I'm going to take a look at Separate Ways. I'm going to give my thoughts on the game, going through the first chapter or so. Then I will move on to the boss encounters. I will also be doing some comparisons to the original Separate Ways, as well as looking at the hinted future of Resident Evil. Be aware that this video will contain spoilers, particularly when I get to the boss part. My first impressions from the opening cutscene were mixed. I think the dance could be seen as a bit awkward. However, I did like Ada's entrance disguised as a cultist, which caught me by surprise. The intro cutscene feels more like a spy caper, which to be fair is more in line with the original game's over-the-top style. Straight after the opening sequence, we are separated from Luis, and we run into Ramon Salazar's bodyguard, Pesanta. Ada is infected by one of the Pesanta's attacks, and she begins to hallucinate. The fight is brief, but at least it gets us into some action. One thing I dislike about the fight is the blur effect that is applied to the whole screen. I think the effect is too strong, and it made me slightly dizzy. After the fight, I am reminded of how great the sound design is in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Standing still in the gated corridor after the fight, you can hear the squeaks and cracks of the old castle. You can even hear Ada sighing and catching her breath from the fight. We move on through the castle gate area, and after a quick cutscene with Wesker, we grapple up a castle wall and are tasked with reaching the castle gate. A cool Bond-like piece of music starts playing, and we are able to tackle this section using stealth. For most of Separate Ways, we are able to tackle the first part of the chapter, or at least the first area, with stealth, before the enemies are alerted. The stealth mechanics are the same as the base game and nothing to write home about, but it's satisfying to play as a spy while you dispatch enemies quietly and no less lethally. In the next chapter, Ada is moving towards the church to rendezvous with Luis. A cutscene plays where Ada wonders what will happen when she hands over the Amber and ponders on the morality of her kind of work. She says everything has changed since Raccoon City. There is a lot more dialogue from Ada, and I think the voice acting sounds better in Separate Ways.
I understood that. Made my peace with it. Until that one night in Raccoon City. Changed everything.
Some sarcastic lines work well, and there are a few opportunities for the voice actress to emote.
You're going to blow up this entire island. including the president's daughter. Won't that make things harder for you?
It's obvious that the voice director asked for a reserved mechanical performance, since Ada is a spy who wants to leave her emotions aside and just get the job done. However, I still feel like a few lines could have used another take.
I wonder what has them so riled up.
Speaking of voice direction, does anyone remember Patrick Stewart and Sean Bean in Oblivion?
For 65 years, I've ruled as Tamriel's emperor.
At release, I remember lots of people complaining about how the voice acting was flat, and they were disappointed in their performances. At the time, I admit finding certain line readings a little flat, but now Oblivion is a treasured gem. People love those more subdued, naturalistic performances.
Yes, I'm a priest. Do you need a priest? I don't think I'll be much help to you. I'm having trouble understanding the gods right now. If all this is part of a divine plan, I'm not sure I want to have anything to do with it.
Sometimes even Richard Sharp can't save the game's voice direction from criticism.
Move, you bastards! Move, you lazy bastards!
Bastard.
On the way to the church, we get to use the grapple gun some more. To use the grapple gun, we just hit one button, and Ada automatically zips up a ledge. When we zip up from below, the animation is nice and smooth, but when zipping across a horizontal position, the animation throws physics out of the window. It's nice to see a different area grappling up the cliffs. They even have their own puzzle, but the grappling segments add more linearity to the DLC. The best feature of the grappling gun is when in combat. Later on, we get a charm which lets us take away the enemy's shield with the grapple hook. It's extremely helpful if you find shields annoying. The grapple gun adds a bit of variety to the gameplay. As a strategy, I enjoyed grapple gunning closer to the enemy than blasting the fucker with a shotgun. I enjoyed a skill that draws you closer to the action quickly. It reminded me of the high risk, high reward combat style of playing as a vanguard in Mass Effect 2. I've seen a few critics compare the grapple gun to that of the Arkham games, but to be honest, I don't know what the fuck they're on about, because this game plays nothing like that. They were also referring to Ada's detective vision when making the comparison, but it's barely used, so there's nothing much to talk about there. There are a few moments where you can overhear the events of the main story take place in separate ways. As Ada is making her way to the church, she can hear the chaos of Leon fighting in the village. When on the roof of the church, we can hear Ashley whimpering up above. At this point in the original, Ada is inside the church when she hears Ashley crying behind a door. From a distance, Ada sees Leon in trouble during his first encounter with the villagers. Ada's objective is to make her way to the church to meet Luis. She finds a villager's diary that says, "The bell rang today. The ringing is the call of our Lord." The whole village congregated at the church to listen. When Ada arrives at the church, she rings the bell to draw the Ganados away from Leon, presumably as a favour to her old friend. Whereas by contrast, the first game's Ada is assaulted upon arriving in the village, presumably because the villagers are on orders to kill any intruders on sight. Wesker tells Ada to ring the bell in order to get the villagers off her back.
The villagers there are all being controlled. They automatically attack any intruders. Ring the church bell. That should quiet them down for a while.
Sounds like they're good, obedient boys and girls.
But in order to do so, she has to solve the puzzle to gain entrance to the church. While she is solving the puzzle, she encounters one of the Chainsaw Sisters and must defeat her in order to retrieve the green cat's eye, which will allow her to progress to the church. Once inside, she is met with a light puzzle, which lowers some kind of contraption, which rings the church bells, getting Leon out of trouble. Later, Leon enters the church and has to raise the bars in order to rescue Ashley. I like the way the two stories interconnect and affect each other in this area, and that Ada has more to do around the church setting. This is more of a comparison than a criticism.
Don't worry, Leon.
Ada has other things to do in the remake, and we do see her face off against two chainsaw-wielding villagers in a nearby factory shortly after. We encounter Pesanta yet again, and Ada succumbs to his illusions. I had a little bit of difficulty during this fight. I died once or twice due to me forgetting about the knife deflect mechanic. Another reason for me dying was due to the blur effects in the area. I had to go into the menu to try and reduce the amount of blur to try and make the image more clear. For the first time in my many years playing video games, I experienced motion sickness while playing this fight. I feel like the effects were a little bit too strong, and it almost looked broken at some points. I don't think this repeat encounter added much to the DLC. I appreciate it may seem like I have focused on a few negatives thus far, but to be honest, the truth is that from this point in the story onwards, I had a blast. It was great to see Ada's iconic weapons make a return. The Blacktail gave a satisfying kick right off the bat. I ended up selling the TMP in favour of my shotgun strategy, thanks to the new improved grapple gun, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy unloading full clips into enemies in true Resident Evil 4 style. Inspecting the guns in the inventory gives us a closer look at her arsenal. The models look gorgeous, and we can see how the designers have tried to retain some details from the original. Blasting enemies with the bowgun has never been more satisfying, although I do admit I'd forgotten that the ammo was explosive, so I need to say a prayer for a factory rat that I shot to see if I could retrieve the bow. I like the way Ada's story is integrated into the original game's story. It feels believable that Ada and Luis's stories are already in motion by the time Leon shows up. Ada and Luis feel like separate characters with their own motivations, and not just background characters to aid Leon and Ashley's journey, so Separate Ways feels better than most bolted on DLCs. I know I never actually made a video covering the RE4 remake. That was simply because I had a lot of nostalgia tied up in the original release. I've only revisited the original a few times since it was released, and during one of my last playthroughs, I was inspired to create a YouTube channel to share the Resident Evil 4 Incubate story. I appreciate that the original Resident Evil 4 veered even further away from Resident Evil survival horror roots, and fortunately, I'm old enough to have been scared shitless by the first Resident Evil on the PS1. All that being said, in this remake, I prefer the latter half of Ada's campaign compared to Leon's. I believe Leon's campaign fell a little short during the island portions of the game, the same way the original did. That's not to say I found it boring. I believe the remake's island gave the introduction of the regenerators a careful treatment. They managed to recapture the horror of discovering these regenerative monstrosities. Even if they did have distracting flesh physics. For all you pervs out there, and by extension me for noticing, I believe they've given Ada the same butt physics. Although it's nothing compared to the Regenerator's booty jiggle, which would make bum implant surgeons around the world blush. Boss fights are mostly well implemented. I would say that the boss fights are actually exceptional for DLC, even beyond the Resident Evil franchise. I'm not talking From Software levels, but a few encounters stand out. I'm diving into spoiler territory from this point onwards. I think I will tackle the boss encounters in my preference order from weakest to strongest. The first boss I want to talk about is a new boss for the remake, referred to as the Unknown Test Subject. I'm not sure why they call it that in the game, since we find a note referring to Martinico. The note says, "The effects of the amber are greater than anything I could have imagined. Martinico was once a fragile, uncontrollable test subject that was despised for being born deformed. But after numerous experiments, it gained tremendous resilience and regenerating abilities, and now it's impervious to conventional weapons. Now for the bad news. It may be stronger, but its mental capacity has not improved at all. In the unlikely event that it breaks free, there is little we can do to contain it again. Only the powerful lasers can stop it for good. When I first saw the laser hole and read a note about killing a monstrosity with a laser, I thought the remake was going to give the fans what they wanted with the iconic laser room, as well as turning it into a meaningful gameplay section. Instead, we are stuck on a linear path, and the boss is pretty much defeated in an interactive cutscene. The game chooses to pay homage to the film adaptation here too. Let's keep them separate, shall we? It would have been better to design a battle that would have us lure the monster into the lasers ourselves. In order to avoid the lasers in the first game, at least we had the divisive QTEs. This time around, we just hit one button. Although I feel slightly negative about the gameplay surrounding the boss, I'm glad of its inclusion. The unknown test subject and the lab setting add to the atmosphere of the game, and gives us a sense that experiments were actually taking place on the island, as well as another explanation as to why we never encounter the researchers. I preferred the laboratory area where we fight Sadler in the original Separate Ways, when compared to the cave sanctuary in the remake. That said, this fight is a big improvement from the original. Mainly due to the increased moveset of Sadler. It took me more than one attempt to beat the boss, although that was me forgetting to parry again. In the original, Sadler mostly just walks towards you, then hits you with his tentacle arm over and over. Once the fight is over, a similar sequence plays out, where Sadler attacks Ada with a new sharp tentacle, which looks like it's going to fucking impale her.
I trust everything is fine on your end.
But she's miraculously fine in the next scene. The second phase of Sadler's fight has Leon fighting a final form of Sadler, while Ada makes her way to toss him the rocket launcher. This section isn't very exciting to play as Ada, but nor was it in the original. The El Gigante encounter is an improvement over the original game. As in that version, we basically get a do-over of the fight Leon has. This fight takes place in a different location to Leon's, in the village centre. This is one of the only boss fights that utilizes Ada's grappling hook to traverse the area. We are able to zip up on top of buildings to get the high ground. The El Gigante starts to smash apart buildings you are standing on, and is capable of completely demolishing buildings. It's interesting to see this area flattened. The rest of the fight plays out in a similar fashion to other El Gigante encounters.
Now stay down.
I've already talked about the two encounters Ada has with the Pesanta in the castle and the village. She has a final encounter with Pesanta in the mines, where Ada lures the creature over the platform and eventually crushes it with a giant piece of gantry. The creature mutates into what we recognize as U3 from the original. Obviously, in the original game, the Verdugo were separate characters from the U3, with the remaining Verdugo being absorbed into Ramon for his fight. The name Pesanta comes from a dog-like creature in Catalan folklore. It is described as an enormous, furry, black dog with steel paws, which it uses to hit anybody who finds themselves in its way. Those paws have holes in them, making it impossible for the creature to grab. Pesanta lives in abandoned churches or other ruins, and it creeps every night into people's homes, entering in through keyholes or under the doors. It shares a connection with the sleep paralysis phenomenon, as it sits on people's chests, giving them breathing problems and nightmares. If the person wakes up, the creature will escape so fast that the only thing the person will be able to see is a shadow running away. At the end of the first stage, the Pesanta drops her hairpin, and we are reminded that this creature used to be the castle's housekeeper.
Oh, and here's some more info I recovered about that old rock. Sending it now.
In the file, Chronicles of Pursuit 2, Isidro Iriarte Talavera talks about his experiments on the housekeeper. October, 8 years since my awakening. At last my noble pursuit progresses to its final stage, the fusion of human and insect. The housekeeper has graciously volunteered herself for the experiment. I shall pour my whole heart into this endeavor in order to transcend my humanity and make Master Ramon proud. March, 9 years since my awakening. A glorious union has been made. The housekeeper has endured much suffering, but not for naught. Behold, the fruits of my labor in all its beauty. I shall consecrate this perfect life form with the name U3, for 3 is the most beautiful and complete number. April, 9 years since my awakening. U3, my dear hound Pesanta, has been chosen to serve as the right hand of my master Ramon. But is 2 not better than 1? Now it is my turn to demonstrate my loyalty. Isidro talks about his experiments and how the housekeeper suffered immense pain during her long transformation. December, 8 years since my awakening. I am at a loss in my endeavors to combine man with insect. Their fusion is not coming to fruition, and my patience wears thin. The housekeeper has long suffered, and I confess that my hair stands on end when I hear her screams of anguish. Will I ever achieve perfection? I have 2 choices. The first is to continue with my current method, to change nothing, but instead widen my search for compatible insect components. The second is more callous, more moral, and yet another completely different organism. If done poorly, the latter choice will likely lead to failure. But I fear I shall not break this deadlock if I do not adjust my current methods. The housekeeper will break if things continue as they are now. I must decide on what to do now. Another of Isidro's notes talks about Pesanta's ability to infect others with her parasite cells. April, 9 years since my awakening. I have received a written petition from Mendez. He wants me to forgive the servant who foolishly ran away. He does not understand. It's not a matter of forgiveness or unforgiveness. Only my noble pursuit matters, for which countless sacrifices are required, an honor for all who dwell in the land of our master. Besides, it would be impossible to remove it from his body now. She implants her prey with part of herself, manipulating their consciousness and trapping them in a waking nightmare. They are bent to her will, no matter how far they try to flee. The only way to truly escape the torment is to kill her, so the entity within her prey dies too. It is, after all, made up of specialized cells which cannot survive on their own. Yet, none are strong enough to put my hound, my Pesanta, down. He later turns himself into the other Verdugo, who fights Leon. I don't have much to say about the fight, other than it's a great encounter. I'm pleased they were able to work into the game a U3-like encounter. I've seen some people compare the second phase of the fight to that of Resident Evil 3's Gravedigger encounter. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these animations pop up in a Code Veronica remake. We all know how much Capcom loves to recycle an asset. If you look closely at the final form, you can see other mutation stages on the model. In order to get to the comms facility on the island, you have to make your way past 2 bunkers with turrets poking out. This section probably replaces the section in the original where Ada is in the waste disposal center, and is probably a better, more fun section to play. Although I did find it hilarious using a minigun and a cannon to sink a warship that Sadler has somehow got a hold of. In the original, shortly after this, we fight Krauser. It's relatively unremarkable, but it's fun to fight Krauser after the interactions we see between the two during Ada's campaign in the original. I guess since they have less to do with each other in the remake, it's not necessary to fight.
That's a large thing you have there.
This segment is ultimately replaced by the unknown test subject. There are a few hints in the Resident Evil 4 remake that there will be a Resident Evil 5 remake. The most in-your-face nod to Resident Evil 5 is when we see that Wesker has recovered Krauser and has taken him away on his ship, presumably in order to extract the dominant plaga from his corpse. One thing I'm going to miss in Resident Evil 5 is Wesker's voice actor. The game gets criticised for its over-the-top tone, but Wesker's voice actor's campy and towards the latter half of the game, insane line delivery helps you enjoy some of the more ridiculous moments.
I don't need anyone else. I have Ouroboros.
That said, I think the new voice actor for Wesker does a good job. He sounds authoritative and intimidating, and there are a few lines that are naturalistic. It will be interesting to see Resident Evil 5's reimagined Wesker. On Wesker's monitor, we see an image of Alexa Gioni, who is an antagonist from Resident Evil 5. She is a British-Italian businesswoman with a background in genetic engineering. She will eventually move into the bioweapons industry and work with Wesker. But here we just see Wesker creeping on her Instagram. We also see a recognisable landmark from RE5, which looks to be the underground garden, sometimes called the Garden of the Sun. It is the location where the flower named Stairway of the Sun is found. The West African plant was researched by Umbrella Pharmaceuticals in the 1960s. They found that Stairway of the Sun is one of the many organisms in the world which the progenitor, a retrovirus, exists within. I wish Capcom would release another DLC, but I find that unlikely. It seems like a waste to have Wesker travel all that way to the island and not do anything. That's all I have to say about Separate Ways for now. Check out my video of the history of Los Illuminados in the village, Resident Evil 4 Valdalobos. It took a bit of time to put together, but it hasn't had many views. Thanks for watching.